Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Red Army podcast, coming to you for the 24th and final time this season. It's been a whirlwind year for the Clash of Champions winners, going on an amazing winning run before falling short in a home URC semi-final. We won't talk about that all too much, unlike other weeks. We're going to keep it as a season review. Forget what happened last Saturday week. It's all about, that block between January and May. That's all that matters. Patricia is with me again to look back on the season at large. And I must say, all in all, not too bad. But we're going to say that anyways, because we're not going to be full doom and gloom here and blame like random people. Like we're not going to blame some, I don't know, some random street seller for Munster losing or anything.
I mean, I might. Depends how we go, but
It's been one of those weeks or 10 days or whatever amount of days it's been since the semi-final. It didn't happen. The match was cancelled. Didn't happen. The
yeah, it was
URC
crazy
final,
because
nope.
we got there and we were in Thomond Park and the weather cleared up in the end, and then we all just there was no rugby match. It was very strange. I've never seen the like of it in Thomond Park, but yeah, it was a very an anomaly, I'd say. To just get there and be wearing the gear, be ready for a match, and for a match to not happen. Very, very strange. I
To
don't I
well,
didn't keep up on what happened, after that.
they won't
In
be
the
able to welcome the team in anymore because obviously that's the reason the match got postponed. There's no other reason why it could have been.
Yeah, it was, I waited around for that and then they never came. And that's actually true. I actually left and went into the stadium because they were late for their own welcome party. But
Did
they
it
just
did it
got
not
lost.
did
They
it
just
not
got lost.
dawn on you that potentially they told everyone a time just to make sure everyone was there early, as opposed to that's the time we're actually going to be there?
Well, I mean, I think if you say you're going to be somewhere at a time, you should be there at that time, personally. But yeah, no, very strange. They never arrived. And I suppose you could say that for
I was gonna
on the
say
pitch. But sure, look, there was a lot of season before that game, so we're gonna look back on all of it, I suppose, as opposed
we'll
to just
look
that
back.
one part.
Yeah, we'll look back at the URC. We'll look back at Europe, Clash of Champions, maybe things like that. There'll be awards. Look ahead to next season way too early because that's the most fun part of being a fan, is just giving random predictions based on absolutely nothing apart from hopium. Um, where do we start? Do we start with pre-season and playing the Barbarians or something like that, or will we just take the URC and just, you know,
There was I am of the opinion that there has been too much rugby this season, like in
that is
general. And
correct.
when you said preseason against the Barbarians, I was like, literally, what the fuck are you talking about?
You
Like
weren't in
that
the
game happened
country, I
like
suppose.
like 8 years ago. Like I don't like. I mean, do you want to start with the Heineken Cup actually? Because that's a shorter conversation, I feel like, than the URC. It's a
That's
bit of a
more. That's worse though.
yeah,
That's
and
the only thing.
then we get to the good part. Like the URC, I know that it didn't end the way we wanted it to end, but there were some genuinely great bits in the middle. Whereas the Heineken Cup just sort of it's a shorter and blunter conversation, I feel.
That's fair. We can start with the Highland Cup. So Munster were drawn with Glasgow, Northampton. I don't have this written down. I'm trying to think. Glasgow,
Why
Northampton,
did you say
Toulon.
that word?
Which one?
Glasgow.
Oh yeah, shit. I forgot about that.
They
Toulon,
played
Bayonne.
Northampton, Bayonne, and Toulon.
Yeah. And then there was another URC team who we don't like that was in that pool as well.
Yeah, but
Who
Munster
do
didn't
you know?
play them, so
Do
it
you know
doesn't matter.
what? It's important to bring this up now. Who lost to Exeter in the most hilarious fashion, if anyone remembers, with that ball that they tried to kick out the scrum, and then there was a tackle off the
Oh my
ball, but they
God, I'd
lose the
forgotten
game.
about that. That was brilliant. To be fair, Munster did also lose to Exeter in a much less hilarious way in the Heineken Cup.
But
So
also slightly hilarious way if you're not a Munster fan. You
yeah,
know,
I mean, with the benefit of the season's over, it doesn't really matter anymore. Like I
but
wasn't
it does.
laughing. I wasn't laughing then, but kind of funny, I suppose. Even though I really don't believe that at all. But yeah, like Munster obviously drew at home with Bayonne and won away against Toulon, and then that was sort of all told for their Heineken Cup season. Ended up losing the round of 16 game away against Northampton, which I feel like is a sort of almost like a separate conversation than the four pool games, given the
Yeah.
context of the literal, I don't know, flesh-eating virus that was ripping through the camp or whatever they had at that stage. So it has been like just absolute tragic comedy of Munster season off the pitch in terms of illness and injury. Like genuinely, we are living in unprecedented times in terms of how many players Munster didn't have available for the vast majority of the season. And I do feel like that context, Munster deserve that context to sort of almost anything you talk about this season, even the bits right at the end. Like, my opinion on the Heineken Cup season has always been, and it hasn't changed given the context of how the URC ended, was that Munster fucked it in Europe, right? They did. I don't think that that's true of the URC just because Munster didn't win it, but I think that the Heineken Cup overall was a little bit of a bottle job this season, and that's with the context. Like, even given the injury situation, Munster should have won at home against Bayonne, and I think that that's fair enough to say. The only game I felt was fair, not fair, but like the only game I would have looked at out of the 4 pool games and gone, it makes sense that Munster didn't win that one. Like, that one's all right to take as a loss, is the home game against Northampton. That was the one where I felt like, you know what,
And even
Munster lost. Well, yeah, no, like, and obviously they could have still won and arguably maybe should have, but that was the one game that I came away from going, right, I know that they lost a man early, but Munster lost Tom Ahern early in that game as well. The weather changed, like the weather made that game not 15 against 14, and losing Tom Ahern was almost like Munster were the team with the player disadvantage. And then Northampton just played this unbelievable performance. Like, Finn Smith on that day was just one of the most bullshit opposition performances you've ever seen. And like, they obviously went on to win the Premiership, and I feel like that game was a huge sort of moment in their season of going, oh, maybe Northampton are actually having a serious season. Like, I felt like it was a game like that, and that one felt much easier for me to swallow as a loss than the extra game or the draw in the Bayonne game. It was a strange European season, like not a vintage European season, I'd say. But yeah, I think overall it's fair to say that part of the season was disappointing.
And I think Europe is one of those things where, like, I know it's such a cliche, it's like, oh, it takes on a life of its own. It's like, it is kind of true in its own regard, in the fact that I think the Exeter win and Bayonne draw, I think if they have 3 or 4 more fit players, because that was just the start of the injury crisis, they probably see them both out.
100%, 100%. But at the same time, Bayonne, it was their first ever Heineken Cup game, and they were away in Thomond Park. Munster should have enough to beat that team, and they were winning by 11 points with 20 minutes to go against Exeter. Like, yeah, those are games that Munster should have closed out, and I feel like we'll say that a lot talking about the early part of the season. That sort of, maybe not first half, but first third of the season anyway. And but I think it's so frustrating, maybe not the right word, but even overall, like, looking at the Heineken Cup season as like a failure, you still feel like, had Munster just had either illness or injury in the round of 16 game and not both, and we're probably talking about the season in a different context. We're talking about them as quarterfinalists, maybe semi-finalists, as opposed to losing again in the round of 16. It's a frustrating one in that sense, because the way I felt all season is, even when Munster were at their worst or at their most debilitated, or whatever way you want to put it, you could still see how good a team they are. Like, there was like a good team trying to break through almost through all of the injury and everything else. And I think, the hope obviously is that next season Munster don't end up in that situation, right?
Yeah.
But the hope is that if Munster end up in that situation again, that they are that 2% better of a team, that they win those games that they lost narrowly, at the start of this season. And obviously that they just weren't that team this year. And that's a hard one to take, because you just feel like we're having a massively different conversation about this season as a whole if they don't end up with literally, what was it, 47% of their squad injured on New Year's Day. Like, that's a stupid number. People really don't give enough credit to how ridiculous that number is of players to have injured.
Like 15 senior players and 3 development players who play full time.
I think the highest the number got was 21. I have 21 in my head, and that includes a Dogbo. Because obviously a Dogbo was an academy player, but he was playing a huge amount of minutes for the first, he was starting big games in November,
and
Campbell,
December. Shane McCarthy, they all picked up knocks.
Yeah, and they were all playing, and I know maybe they were playing because of and you forget this season as well. Obviously, the World Cup was involved, so there was players maybe on it. You had guys playing minutes to sort of cover the guys who were at the World Cup, then they get injured, and then there's sort of who is left. And then you have things like, you know, Keith Earl's not coming back after the World Cup, Andrew Conway retiring at the start of the season as well. Like, the context of Munster's team changed so much throughout the season, and like they were kind of helpless to it. Like, you can't not get players injured. Like, if players are going to get injured, they're going to get injured. It's not a, you know, you can't really mitigate that. Like, you go out on the pitch, and if you take up a knock, or if you get hit badly, or whatever it is, you get hit badly. You've got things like, you know, John Clane coming back from the World Cup, literally with the medal in his fucking pocket, playing one game and then not being seen again this season. Like, you don't sort of account for the start of the season because you can't. So their season, it's such a hard one to talk about as a whole, because it is so overshadowed by that. And even then, I don't know that Munster had overall an unsuccessful season. It's a really strange one to try and like put into a box, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. And it's kind of like, if you took Europe as kind of like a microcosm, granted Europe is like what, 5 games or 6 games or whatever. Like, Bayonne, as I said, probably should have won that. Exeter should have won. Toulon, probably the first time in about 2 months of that season that we got everyone fit, everyone available, got a bench impact, had starting players playing really, really well, and like wiped the floor with Toulon for large parts of that game. It kind of, I remember getting the vibes of the final, insofar as we're a better team than what the scoreline suggested on the day. Like, they scored a freak try that didn't really do anything. Well, not a freak try, a wonder try. Didn't really do anything else. Northampton game was there for the take, and I think if there was this part of that season which is easy to forget, Munster played Leinster and Connacht and Northampton in yellow wind and rain warnings. Yeah,
I have chosen to forget it.
Chosen to forget in yellow and orange weather warnings. And if that doesn't happen, maybe they beat Northampton. Maybe they're not playing away in Northampton in round of 16. And even at that, like, if they didn't have a bug, it feels like they win that game, because they were to a man.
And that's brilliant. My point. There's so much, like, they were so close, and not in the nearly man way that they have been in the past, where it was like, oh, they were so close to not having to play Leinster away in a semi-final in the RDS and losing by 20 points. Like, that's not what I mean. And that's not the kind of the reputation I would want Munster to have anymore, if that makes sense. But I think, like, when you actually care to look at the context of game to game what Munster were dealing with this season, you can see how good a team they are, I feel. Because if you, like, I don't think there's one game this season, and I include last weekend's URC semi-final in that Munster don't win if their squad is like 20% fitter. Genuinely, I don't think on the day that they played any of those games that they lost in December and January, and whatever games they lost since then, you know, you look at the round of 16 game and you look at the URC semi-final, I don't think that they lose any of, like, those games were tight games, every single one of them. And I think if Munster have, and I don't know, like, I'm not naming names as in if X, Y, and Z were fit, but just overall, like, given, you know, that level of injury makes the rest of your squad tired. So, like, if Munster have a sort of 20 to 30% smaller injury pile throughout the season, I do not think that there's any game that they were out the gate beaten convincingly on the day, if that makes sense. That's how I feel about the season overall.
You just look at the stats of, like, players who were crucial maybe last season or in years gone by. Dave Kilcoyne played a total of 3 games this season. Keenan Knox and Roman Solanoa combined for 0 games this season. Sean Clane played 1.
That's so brutal. You could have just said they didn't play.
Sorry. Sean Clane played 1. Edwin Dogbo played the first 7 games of the season, was ruled out for the rest of the year. Obviously Mike Haley only got back towards the back end of the season. Andrew Conway only played once. Keith Earls, as we know, retired before the season started after the World Cup. Paddy Patterson only played 5 times. Like, and that's where the load-bearing injuries kicked in.
Even like Ollie Yeager and Alex Nankerville joining sort of not mid-season, but after the start of the season, they were both injured a couple of times throughout the season, like those sort of short ones that keep you out for, you know, 5-6 weeks. Like, players, even players who were like consistently sort of felt available this season. You know, Hodnett missed a chunk through injury. Ahern had a couple of Ahern was injured during the Six Nations and then obviously injured again at the end of the season. Like, it was genuinely like dystopian, you know, post-apocalypse movie level of injury crisis for Munster this season, and it didn't really let up. There was about 3 weeks in the middle where it let up, like sort of when Munster went down to South Africa in the URC, and even then their list of unavailable players included, you know, like John Ryan through suspension, John Klein, Edwin Adogbo. Like, it was still a fair list of players injured even when Munster were at their fittest, and that's without even sort of taking Earls and Conway into consideration, because that's a huge adjustment to make to a key area of your team sort of on the fly as the season. Like, Munster weren't, I'm sure Munster sort of felt like Keith Earls was probably going to retire after the World Cup, but they weren't legislating for playing the entire season without Andrew Conway. Like, Andrew Conway was back at the start of the season. That wasn't on the books, I suppose. And it's one of those
what
where
a buzz that was as well. And then just for it to be struck down.
You know, I am the sort of the absolute president of the Andrew Conway fan club. Like, he is probably my favorite player to ever play for Munster, and I don't say that lightly. And when he scored his 50th try and his 150th cap, I was like, we are so back. Like, Munster are just going to win every single game this season. And then, like, 3 days later, it was like, Andrew Conway's retired now. So what the fuck?
And the assist from Alex Nyquvel as well. It's like, oh my God, this is a new era. Here's a guy who literally just got into Ireland on like Tuesday, thrown a pass to our fucking favorite player who's just back from injury. And like, it's weird because the season had so many of those moments where you remember the most random things. Andrew Conway retires. Remember that, where you were. Remember where you were with Keith Earls retires. Remember where you were where Zeebs retires. I remember literally the last thing I checked, I was just about to go to bed when the Orcus name and news dropped by Jerry Thornley. I was literally just putting my phone down. That pops up. I'm like, fuck. And it was full of those moments where you're
that
like,
was so
I remember
much
where
fun,
I was.
actually.
The John Ryan
hindsight.
suspension. Like, I remember like literally just going out. I was doing a few jobs around the house or something, heading outside, get the news. We'd only just recorded the day before. It was only just gone live. And you're reading that and you're like, fuck. And that was what this season was. The whole way through till about February, even when Tom Sahern gets injured. And Tom Sahern is like the anti-woe of this season in so many ways, but in particular because he got one injury up until the Ulster game. And that one injury kept him out of a grand total of one Munster match. And that was the Crusaders game. We got
he timed it really well.
Regard. I think John Hodden was similar. I think the only game he missed, I think he missed the Benetton game or something like that, but he also missed like Zebra and Quins, where he got really lucky that way as well. And it's like, they're the only wits. Everyone else seemed to be like, I'm back. I'm going to play. We got Leinster this weekend. Great. Oh, 10 minutes in. Oh, fuck, I'm gone. And it was just that, like.
I think that's the kind of the beauty of loving a sports team the way that we love Munster, because there are people obviously who follow sport but aren't like entrenched in it the way that we are. Don't let the guys playing the kids game sort of dictate how they feel for weeks on end, right? And I envy those people. God, I'd love to be one of them.
I don't.
No, I mean, I actually don't. Like, I say that, but like, you know, it must be so fucking boring to not let random guys who you've never met dictate how you feel on a daily basis. But I think that being able to pick out those moments and think about it in terms of, like, for example, when I went away to Northampton to watch the round of 16 game, and a group of us, friends of ours, went to the aquarium in Birmingham on the Saturday, because we had booked the trip as though the match was going to be on the Saturday. Then the match is Sunday afternoon. So we had the Saturday free. We were in the aquarium, and I get a notification on my phone that says, RG Snyman is not playing tomorrow because he was still shitting, right? Or whatever he was fucking doing, I don't know. Clinging, RG Snyman unavailable, open brackets, clinging to the toilet, close brackets. And he'll be replaced by, I can't even remember, Flean Wycherley or whoever. And I read it out, and I didn't say anything, I just read it.
Wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
How would we have 3 second rows? Get yourself
together. I read it out, and nobody said anything. Like, everyone just looked at me, and nobody said anything because they were waiting for me to finish the joke. Like, they thought I was doing a really unfunny bit, and that I had like forgotten to finish my joke. And I was like, no, guys, like, this is a real thing I just read. Like, this is actually happening. And it's little moments like that. And I feel like that's the sort of the beauty of, obviously we all want our team to win trophies all the time, right? But if the only way you can measure your team's season being successful is whether or not they win a trophy, then 99% of teams are having unsuccessful seasons every year. Like, a very small percentage of the teams are the ones that win the trophies, really. And I think, like, those moments, and, you know, not like the sort of the mushy stuff, but like your memories of like being at games and moments that happened during games, and Munster might have lost the games afterwards, but like that moment sticks out for you in a season. And I think everybody's moments are different, and I think that's really beautiful. And I love that about supporting Munster, is that you're never going to be short of a fucking narrative to your season. Like you're never going to be short for like a storyline, a plot to follow. And this season's plot was, like I said, like one from a post-apocalyptic movie, but like
What
they
a
kind of
deeply weird season in that regard. It's like,
they got there in the end. Like,
yeah, and like that's the thing. It's like, oh, we're just gonna like I'm trying to think of a good example, but it's kind of like as if, oh, here, the door is open, but we're just gonna slam it in your face right as you reach the door. And that was kind of what this season was at times, where it's like, oh, look,
I
you're getting
think
players back for the first Leinster game. No, 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 you're gonna get like 3 players injured in that game and things like that. And like Northampton game is a perfect example of that, with Calvin Nash, Shane Daly, and RK Snyman all ruled out. We knew the likes of, say, Craig Casey and lads like that were sick at the time, and multiple more, because clearly, like
yeah.
that didn't just hit the biggest person and smallest person in the dressing room and no one else. We know John Ryan, as we remember. Stephen Archer had to go 80 minutes with no Adi Jaeger either, which is easy to forget. And we already had no Roman Saldo, as we mentioned earlier. And it's like, and we discussed this before the Glasgow game. I was so nervous that day. Coming down, to be fair, it never feels like a long trip. It's only an hour and a half. It's grand. It's a short enough trip. But once I got to Thomond, I was like, oh, I'm shitting bricks here, lads. I am absolutely shitting bricks. I can't do this. Like, why do people do it? And then we had this conversation, met a few people outside Thomond, and we were like, well, at the same time, isn't this fucking cool? Like,
Why wouldn't you do it? Like, if I could
exactly.
choose, I wouldn't choose any differently. And one of my favorite things about Munster being the team that have my heart specifically, and I think one of the most beautiful things about it is like the lowest moment you have in a season as a Munster supporter. Like, and this season, I think for a lot of us, it was New Year's Day. I
Oh
think that
God, yeah.
that was the depths of the deep. Like there was rock bottom, and then they dug down a little bit more, and they settled down there. But I feel like even in that moment, obviously there's the sort of the emotional side of it, and you're fucked off and you're raging, and it's like, why the fuck is this happening? But you never sort of doubt that they're gonna fix it, like that they'll come good. And I feel like that's not just a blind belief. It's that they've proved that to us so many times over the years that, you can't count them out. And when you do think it's over, is like 10 seconds before they're actually back. And that's something I actually said to Jeremy Barron in Northampton. I was like, I just don't really believe that you can't win these games, like no matter what the circumstances are like. And he's like, well, yeah, because we've done it loads of times. And I was like, yeah, well, exactly. That's my point. And I think that that's so much fun. I love that. Like, even we were just saying before we recorded, the URC semi-final, we're not going to talk about it in huge depth or anything, but Munster were beaten out the gate. Like, my feeling, even while I was in the stadium, was that from what you could see on the pitch, I thought it was quite obvious that Munster are a better team than Glasgow, but Glasgow were better on that day and made fewer mistakes. And the gap between them is not so big that they wouldn't win in that circumstance, right? But even when Antoine Frisch scores, I was like, well, Munster are going to win. They're going to do a quote unquote Munster on it. This is Ben Healy kicking that conversion in Belfast. This is Rory Scannell kicking that penalty against whatever it is. Like there's like 1,000 examples you can give of Munster doing that. And I personally never believe that they're not going to do it. Like that they can't just pull that out no matter how well they're playing. And I think that's so much fun. I would much rather have that and support the team who, don't get it done on one occasion, but I always believe that they will, rather than support a team who say, like, I don't know, get to a final or a semi-final and you just think, well, obviously they're not going to win this because they haven't won it the last 8 years in a row. Why would they win it now? And I think Munster were that team for a while with those league semi-finals away in Dublin, and they're not that team anymore. And I love it. I like you can talk about this season being a bottle job, or you can talk about Munster not winning a home game in the Heineken Cup, and all of those things are true, and being 11th place in the URC, and like obviously it would be much better if those things didn't happen, but it would be boring. Like, Munster are not a boring team to support, and I feel like maybe it's a little bit toxic of me, but I'd always rather that kind of season when it ends like on that high than, you know, just winning consistently from September.
Like there's something, and we kind of touched on it there. There's something about it that's like it just brings you back in. And like you look at that run in the middle of the year from that Leinster game where Jean Klein gets injured and I think someone else got injured as well. Lose to Leinster in the Aviva, beat Glasgow, draw with Bayonne, lose to Exeter, lose to Leinster, lose to Connacht, beat Toulon. Oh, we're back. We got Toulon. We're back. Like everyone wrote us off.
And then lose to Northampton.
Lose to Northampton. And then from there, oh yeah, we're just going to win 9 out of 10 games, including 9 in a row in the, or 10 in a row in the URC, including, and it's like, it's so incomprehensible in so many ways. But at the same time, it's
so
also
comprehensible.
everything, but it's also everything that people said wasn't the case about Munster. There was this idea that, oh, Munster get up for the big games and they won't show up for the other games. But yet they got like 44 out of 45 points in their last 9 regular season games. And that's not just because of fucking emotion and spite. Like they actually got everyone available, went through the motions, got the job done, looked ruthless at times in some of those games. You think of that Lions game that we keep going back to and how they just plodded their way through it.
Yeah. That was the performance of the
game.
season for me, the Lions game. I think I said it at the time. And I think as well, like everything that I just said is not any less true, right? And I that's how I feel about supporting this team, is how I've always felt. And I feel like it's only heightened now by the fact that they did win the trophy. Like they sort of got over the line after so many years and looked odds on to do it again this season. And that wasn't an accident. Like it wasn't a fucking fluke that Munster finished top of the regular season, right? And that everybody loves their team, right? We're not special for loving our team. You know, everybody who supports a sports team loves that team sort of unequivocally. But there is an emotional edge that Munster have that other teams don't have. And obviously we're going to say that. But if you ask any supporter of any other team, any player or coach of any other team, anyone who's ever like played Munster, anyone who knows anything about rugby, and they will cite Munster in that way. Like the Crusaders came to play Munster because of Munster as a whole, like what Munster is. But I think that sometimes can distract people from the fact that Munster are a fucking good rugby team now, right? Like Munster have been a good rugby team for a lot of years, but Munster are a very good team. They are very well coached. They are really highly skilled. They have a great squad of players when they're fit. And like, that's not any less true just because they kind of can do the magic stuff and they can make you feel all these feelings, right? Like those two things definitely go together. And I think that Munster maybe don't get the credit at times because of the losses earlier in the season, right? And I understand where it's coming from. You know, you look at the team in 11th place in the URC on New Year's Day and you're not thinking they're a very good team. Like Munster this season, certainly for the first half of the season, were a very good team in a very bad situation. And I just think that they maybe don't get the recognition they deserve for how good they actually are. And when they started playing well in these games, people were like, where the fuck did this come from? Like that was always there. That's the team that Munster have been for the last 2 years. They were just able to recognize it because there was more than 12 players fit now. And like they're a really fucking good team. Like I don't think there's any way to put it. Like you look at the sort of the level of skill they were playing at when they were playing at their best is, you know, arguably unmatched in Europe. Like they are a really good team. And it's hard to say sometimes that, you know, they're one of the best teams in Europe because they lost in the round of 16, right? They're not one of the best teams in the European Cup this season. I'll grant you that. But I think, like I said, on their day and with a proper squad of players to choose from, I don't think there's any team in Europe who you would look at and say 100% Munster cannot beat them right now.
Yeah.
Even to lose. I like
yeah.
That's how I feel. Like they are a really good rugby team.
I go back and forth to Toulouse, but everyone else, I'd be like, yeah, there's places.
Look, am I saying Munster would be favourites against Toulouse? No, that's not what I'm saying. But I'm not. But I don't think you could sit there and comfortably say that Munster cannot beat Toulouse. If you look at like Munster's best 23, you know, the 23 that played the Bulls and the Lions games, that 23, I think you'd say could beat Toulouse. Not saying would, but could. Like they can compete with any team, and I think that they sort of almost gave themselves a bad reputation by having 50% of their squad injured. Silly team. Why would you have 50% of your squad injured? Simply have more fit players. You know, simply dig into the sub academy and signed
Did
Jordy
they
Barrett.
try?
Stupid
Did
rugby
they
team.
try making it work? That is
I
the
mean,
question.
I think they tried, but I don't think they were particularly successful at times. And like overall, do you think Munster had a successful season? Because this is the one I keep going back and forth on. Because like if you measure success as a trophy, then obviously not. But I think there's so much more to success than that.
You see, do you know the way some people use the term like, oh, you either succeed or fail in sport?
Mm-hmm.
You either win or you lose. I'm usually not as strong, and I'm
Are you saying they lost but they won?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm like the anti-hot take. Oh, you choked. Oh, you bottled it. Oh, you failed. I don't do any of that shit. But at the same time, I'm like, from where they were in the middle of the season, successful season. From where they were at the end of the season, unsuccessful season. Because ultimately, to have a home semi-final and to not make a home final, never mind lose or whatever, is falling short. Like that's the only way.
Yeah, and obviously compared to last
it's
season,
context. If at the start of the season, home semi-final in the URC, I'd say underachieved massively in Europe. Even with context, underachieved massively in Europe.
Yeah, 100. I agree.
Reached the bare minimum in the URC. Not the bare minimum. I think home semi-final is just above that. A semi-final in the URC is the bare minimum now. So I think you can balance the two together. And with context, I think it's more positive than negative. Because again, like Munster used less players than say Ulster did. They had 5 or 6 key players from last year, didn't play any minutes or played limited minutes. Like to think of out of like Conway, Earls, Klein, Salanoa, the players out of all those played the most minutes this season was John Klein.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
Basically
like,
wasn't there. You know, he went off and won a World
game.
Cup, like, you know.
And that's the thing. So I'm like, with context, with everything adding together, I think it's more positive than negative. But at the same time, I do think they need to reach the same standard next year when there's more turnover, just to kind of keep the perception of themselves going. And I think the most important thing for next season, before we kind of move solely onto the URC as opposed to Champions Cup, is I think they need a big result at home in Thomond Park in Europe.
Yeah.
Either that or beat Leinster in, like, realistically, that game is going to be in Croke Park, that one in November or in October.
Yeah, I think so.
Either win there or win in Thomond Park, but ideally win in Thomond Park against either Leinster or against someone in Europe and get that monkey off your back, because ultimately Munster's worst performances this season in terms of the most disappointing was the Northampton game, maybe the Bayonne game, but I don't think that's the same because it wasn't as big of an occasion. But the Northampton game, potentially some of the second half against Leinster and Season of the Day, and the Glasgow game. And that ultimately is not, for me, just a tactics issue, because tactically they got it right, they didn't execute, and that falls on the players for me. And that's where it just, I look to next, because I think with these goals and these objectives, you have to look at next season then and look at how you right them or wrong them or whatever. And that's the bit that, walking out of Thomond Park, that's the bit that was in my head. Like, I spoke to a guy outside, and it was one of the first things that came to mind. I just think Thomond Park it was unbelievable for the semi-final. It was unbelievable to run into the season. There was a buzz, it was unmatched, but I think the players ended up looking a bit small in the big occasion, and that's really disappointing. And I think that's something they have to right next season, I think.
Yeah, I feel like Thomond Park has almost become a monkey on the back, like without anyone really noticing. And it's such a fucking,
without necessarily losing either. It's just because the performances haven't been good enough.
It's so Munster to have a home stadium that's got such a good aura that it gives your fucking players the yips. Like, come on. Like, what fucking team would be sort of too inspirational at home to play in their own fucking home stadium? Like, it really actually starting to annoy. But like, I just feel like the semi-final against Glasgow, even, you know, people were saying like that's a bottle job, like Munster bottled the URC semi-final. And I understand why people think that, but I do think that even that game needs the context of Munster looked leggy and tired. Well, they looked leggy and tired because they haven't been able to rotate their squad the way they would have liked because everyone was injured all season. And like, I think you're right in that this season almost hinges on next season to figure out whether this season was, you know, a bad season or not. Like, if Munster go on and get to a Heineken Cup semi-final next season and, you know, are in the URC final, then like that's sort of where they're supposed to be. And I think that they are well placed to press on. I know we're going to talk about next season a little bit. Like I think that they are well placed to press on for next season, and like you just want to not have fucking half your squad injured like that. And again, like Munster can't control that. Munster can't control that, right? The hope is that they don't have to go on this generational run at the end of the season from 11th to 1st, because they haven't been so, shackled by injury at the start of the season that they haven't put themselves in a position where they've had to do that run, but they've ended up in that position. Like the hope is that you don't end up there. But yeah, I think it's an unsuccessful successful season, and in that they didn't end up with a trophy. Like that's the big thing, and it really did look like they were going to win the URC in Thomond Park. Like that's really what it looked like, and I think that are heartbreaking and unsuccessful the same thing? Maybe
yeah, there has to be some sort of overlap. Like we can't stand up and just say, oh, it was excellent, it was disappointing, and it was heartbreaking. Like there has to be some overlap. It was disappointing as much as it was heartbreaking. And just to get back to the point I was making there a few minutes ago, there's a chance Munster will have some internationals available for that Maori All Blacks game because Ireland don't play that weekend. That could be the game that gets that monkey off their back if they get a big result. I'm not saying it will. I'm saying it could. Like there's a possibility, and I think.
And that's what happened, like with the South Africa game and with the Crusaders game. It feels like those sort of expositional friendlies are where they can, and like in the South Africa game, it was where they sort of were able to play the attacking game that they were trying to play because they had no pressure on them.
The Crusaders game, they remembered how to play rugby.
Yeah, the Crusaders game was obviously a different context, and like I don't think that Munster struggle with being able to play rugby anymore like they were doing by the time they got to that South Africa game. But it is one of those that's like Thomond Park is going to be packed, and like that pressure isn't there, and it has felt like the last 2 seasons that they've been able to bring that into the other games. And like look, the hope is that they won't need to do it. That's the thing, like they don't need this huge emotional sort of response from a performance like that, because they've just been like humming along at a consistent level all season. Munster season this year was very up and down, and again it's worth saying that there is a context and a reason to that. Like it can be very easily explained why Munster season is up and down, and it's not because they're a bad rugby team who fluked some good results, as some people might want you to think if they write in national newspapers. But
I did not consider that. I thought they just fluked their way to 9 wins. Shit.
They finished top of the URC by accident.
Oh, so they failed upwards. Oh, that's very Irish rugby.
Everyone else let them win those 9 games, actually.
Yeah, Toby Booth let us win, and then he went to vote for Graham Rowntree as coach of the year in hope that he'd actually win it himself. That's playing the long game.
In hopes that the URC would see that he thought Graham Rowntree was a great coach and go, you know what, that's so humble, we'll actually give it to him instead.
Absolutely.
I'd love to do a psychological study into the brains of people who support Welsh teams, but anyway, that's a separate conversation.
I mean, that could be a mid-season winter. Like we played Zebra second, so maybe not the Zebra game, but like before you play some scrub team like the Blue Bullfrogs or something, and just be like, right, let's sit down with Welsh fans and see what it's actually like, and study.
That's what I can do while the Emerging Ireland games are on. I won't be watching them.
The which now? We don't. I thought it was your rule, and by design, and quite rightly, that we don't talk about Ireland on this podcast.
You have an Ireland flag on the wall. You have the Ireland flag on the wall behind you.
Yeah, I know. Shut up.
What are we talking about now?
URC. We talked a lot about the last 9 games of the season because they're the only ones that matter. They're the only ones that matter. That first half of the season and being 11th in the table, and yes, it was shite. Don't get me wrong, but then you look at the context as well, and Munster probably had like getting a draw away at Benetton felt like 2 points lost, but at the same time, 2 points gained because Benetton are so good.
No, it didn't. On the day, Munster were so bad that it was like absolute fucking daylight robbery to come off with 2 points from that game.
They were terrible. I remember that, but a lot of people, if they just looked at it, they mightn't remember that. Like we were awful. But then you got Ulster and Ravenhill after Ulster, like just do what they do in Ravenhill. Beat the Stormers. Probably should have beaten Leinster in the Aviva. ran out of gas in the end, beat Glasgow. Like, I know they lose to Leinster and Connacht at Christmas time. It's actually not that bad considering the fixtures they had.
See, it's the like, and I keep saying it, it's the like people forget the context of games. So like, and obviously, right, that's, you know, at the end of the season, all you're going to see is won X amount of games, lost X amount of games, and that's fair enough. The Leinster game in the Aviva was the only time this season that Munster had enough fit players to purposely rotate their squad. Like, they sent it, very typical, you know, Leinster in South Africa fashion. They sent the young team up to the Aviva Stadium and arguably should have come away with a result against a Leinster team that was pretty stacked that day. Like, that's the context to that game that people will forget by the end of a season. But at the time, I always felt like that was an impressive performance, and that was one that was a loss on the scoreboard, but I think Munster gained more from that. And then obviously 38 other players got injured, so whatever they gained from that went away again.
I'm going to throw a quiz question at you here off the cuff. Do you remember what the title of the podcast was, of this podcast, after that Leinster game?
I mean, I'm almost certain it was We Lost But We Won.
It was.
Because
absolutely sew it in.
You know, and like, I hate that, but I mean, I like I was saying about whether a season is successful or unsuccessful, whether you base that solely on trophies. Like, you can, Munster, like, not that they won, but you can take things from a match that are not results, right? Like, you can take things that are not necessarily a win or 4 match points or whatever. Like, there are things that you can learn from games that you can't teach, that can't be taught in training. Munster had a lot of those this season, that sort of like ingrained sort of hardness in them now, and they're like, you only get that from losing all those games and being in 11th on New Year's Day and having 82% of your squad injured. That number is going to get higher every time I say it, because I feel like it deserves it. Like, by the end of the podcast,
99.99.
By the end of the podcast, it's going to be 104% of Munster squad who were injured at one point this season.
9 out of 10 dentists recommend that Munster were a complete shambles during the season.
But it's that, like, every one of those games, and I feel like I was very level-headed, which is unusual for me at that stage in the season. And I feel like I kept saying, like, these games, Munster are not losing these games because they're bad. Like, they were never a bad team this season, I don't feel. And like, they played badly at times, don't get me wrong. It's not that they, you know, it's not that every result gets sort of contexted away. Like, some of them, they were just bad. You know, the Bayonne game, they played badly in that game. They should have won that game, regardless. Like, whatever, take the injuries out of it, I don't care. Like, they should have won that game, absolutely. But that sort of, when Munster went on that run of losing those games that they were winning by like 10 or 11 points, and people were like, oh my god, it's systemic, Munster are going to lose every game after being 10 points ahead now. I never felt it was that. You know, I didn't think that Munster were 17-0 all their games, sort of because of some sort of generational curse or whatever people want to say. But like, that part of the season was bad. Like, there's no, it's a hard one, because it's like, was it as bad as it felt at the time? Probably not, but it was still bad. Like, there's no sort of point in pretending that things were not like sort of critical level at that stage, because they were
disappointing. Because realistically, if Munster have, okay, you're never going to have a fully fit squad. I understand that. No one come at me for that. But if you have
even a mostly fit squad, yeah,
you probably, okay, maybe you don't get over the line against Leinster. When you look at, like, the bench had 3 academy players on it, for instance, like, we weren't focused on that game. You probably get over the line against Bayonne, against Exeter, maybe even against Leinster and Thomond Park on St. Stephen's Day, which is actually one of the more underrated performances in some regards, where a lot of players played well. Like Owen Clark, second game for Munster, and he's just going toe-to-toe with fucking Dan Sheehan.
Yeah, like, and came on early as well. Like, that was the one, obviously, where Diarmaid Barron went off after like 4 minutes or whatever. And
Edwin Adogbo was bullying lads who we don't make in this country, and then he gets injured in the second half. You know, like, that was one of the weird ones. Like, Ollie Jaeger doesn't play his first game for Munster until that Glasgow game. Now, I'm not saying that Ollie Jaeger's recent Munster season fell apart in the middle of the season, but like, we didn't have him before that. Do you know what I mean? Alex Lagerfeld came to Munster having played a heap of games. He had to be rotated out every once in a while. Like, Simon Zebo's first game was that Leinster game, first game of the season. That was Dave Coyne's first game of the season. Like,
and last.
He played Stevens' Day as well.
I was only messing, but you know, that's how it felt.
Yeah, no, he played 3 times this season. And I don't even know what the third one is.
I feel like
he played against Bayonne. I don't remember that. I don't remember the
I feel
Bayonne
like
game.
you can context everything that happened this season from a Munster point of view back to that level of injuries, and not to excuse it away. Like, I do still feel that Munster should have won the URC. I think that they should have had enough at that stage in the season. And obviously, look, they got hit with some injuries again. Like, they kind of got re-injured at the end of the season to go with their injuries at the start of the season. And I feel like if one of those things doesn't happen, like if the injuries are worse, if the injuries are not as bad at the start of the season, I feel like it gets Munster over the line at the end of the season. Like, they just ran out of steam, and any squad's going to do that when you look at the level of sort of use and abuse that some of those players had to go through because there was nobody to rotate them with. You know, even like guys like Fineen Wycherley being injured for a huge part of that season, like that level of player, that depth player is so important, because when you're rotating out Tyke Byrne, you need Fineen Wycherley to step in. But if Fineen Wycherley is injured as well, then Tyke Byrne has to play all those games. And like that happened in too many positions for Munster to just sort of overcome it through emotion and magic and being Munster at the end of the day. And that's what it was. Like, it's
See, that's the important thing, because I think, like, just go through it again. Like, Dave Coyne barely played this season, so Jeremy Luckman played 21 games for Munster this season. He started 18 of those. Like, he was omnipresent.
You know,
So
if you
he
look
had
at
to play
someone
more. Dearborn Barron had to
Shane
play 80
Daly,
minutes a lot.
you know,
Shane
someone
Daly
like
played every game.
Shane Daly missed 10 minutes in the URC season this year, and it's because he got a yellow card, like literally so he could have a fucking rest. And that
The
comes
game he was
because
taken off in was after the 80th minute.
that
You
comes
know,
that comes because, you know, Earls and Conway retired, and you had injuries to guys who would have maybe stepped in, like Campbell, and you know, like it all comes back to that. And I think that makes this season, certainly from a URC point of view, feel like one that got away almost. And that's what they used to feel like. But I think that this one feels so different, because those ones, in my opinion, felt like one that got away in a more hopeful way, in that, like, oh, if only we'd had, you know, if only we'd signed 3 more players and we were an actually better rugby team on the pitch, then maybe we would have won this year. And this one felt like, you know, Munster were being held back in a different way. Like, Munster have all of the pieces now. There was just some of the pieces that were just out of reach for huge parts of this season. And I think that that's a much more hopeful position to be in as a supporter of a team who didn't win a trophy this year. Like, that's where I think Munster want to be. That's not where they want to be. They want to be the team who wins the trophy. But if you're not going to be the team that wins the trophy, I think that Munster's position, where they finished top of the regular season, which is not a win, but is an achievement. Objectively, it's a thing you achieved. You were the best team across those 18 games. Whatever anyone wants to say, you are the team who accrued the most points over those 18 games. That means something.
yeah.
And then,
that means something for next season.
Losing
when
the semi-final,
you have a shit start to the season again. Like, you need to be able to recall that.
Losing the semi-final being a disappointment as opposed to a sort of a shrug and better luck next year, that matters. Like, that's a huge flip from where we were 2 years ago as supporters of this team. Like, you know, expecting Munster to win those big games is where you want to be. And obviously, look, it's sport. You're not going to win them all the time. And I think watching the URC final, and no disrespect,
wouldn't be me.
No disrespect, looking at how bad the Bulls were in that game, it felt even more like one that got away, because you were like, Munster would have put fucking 50 on the Bulls on Thomond Park in that final. And whatever about Thomond Park being cursed, like Spooky Island or whatever.
Tackles. How do
you
miss 40
game?
I haven't, like, I'd say you wouldn't see a team miss 40 tackles in a fucking 80-minute tag rugby match. Like, that is obscenely bad.
And I think every negative, you can find a positive in it, not in a, like, not to go like, oh, every cloud or whatever. Like, Munster not winning a trophy this season fucking sucks, right? And losing in the way that they did, where they just ran out of steam in a home semi-final against fucking Glasgow of all teams, is the pits. Like, I am not mitigating that at all. It fucking sucks. It's the worst. I drove home, you know, 2.5 hours back to Wexford completely in silence after that game. We didn't turn on one song. Like, we just literally sat there. And like, Serena was in the car with me, and we were just literally sat there. We were like, what are we supposed to fucking do next week now? Like, we literally planned to go to Limerick, and now we're not. And it hurts. Like, it was bad. But I think it is the best losing position you can be in, to be the team that are annoyed that you lost because you feel like you should have won, that you should have had enough to win. That's where you want to be. You want to support a team that are good enough that you feel annoyed when they lose those games, as opposed to just feeling like obviously upset because your team lost, but sort of coming back and going, oh, but they played above their level. Like, no, they didn't. Munster's level is higher than this. Yeah. And that's where you want to be. You don't want to be at your ceiling. And I don't think that Munster are. I don't think they were this season. And that's like inherently, that's a positive thing.
See, that's the thing. Because I think, because someone asked this question before about like what's the performance this season. You mentioned the Lions game. I think that's the best performance. But in terms of 80 minutes of Munster doing what Munster do, I don't think it is. I think arguably like the Connacht game or the Edinburgh game or one of those is probably close to it. The Toulon game is probably the one because, again, without a wonder try, Toulon don't lay a finger on Munster for 80 minutes or whatever.
The Connacht game is arguably the only game this season where Munster started playing well after 1 minute and then just never stopped.
Yeah. I mean, and it's a complete juxtaposition to what happened on New Year's Day where they nearly scored a try. That doesn't get allowed. And it's like, right.
Oh, it felt so good.
Over. Yeah, that was the worst week of the year for me until Munster lose to Glasgow again. Fucking Glasgow. And then fucking the golf is on the following night. And as a lot of people know, Roy McIlroy 2-shot lead with 3 to play at the US Open. And I'm sitting there and I think this is it. This is going to make my weekend. And then that doesn't happen. And the following day, I'm not even thinking about Munster. That's the only thing that gave me was I have not thought about Munster since the Saturday or the Sunday because the golf happened. But because of that, it was because I was dead inside. I did not want to watch sport. I love sport. Did not want to watch it. And funnily, just because it's in my head, because before we move on to something else, did you know that the semi-final was our most listened to, a semi-final preview was our most listened to episode this season? And there was a spike the day after the match. So clearly some Glasgow fans found it and were like, oh, let's listen to this. And to that I say, fair play.
You know what I'm going to say, right? And you will never catch me being this magnanimous about that group of cunts ever again. But it would be actually remiss, and it would just be a flat out lie to sit here and pretend that what they did this season wasn't hugely impressive. Glasgow, this is, right? Like, I'm not so fucking...
I thought you meant the podcast listeners.
I'm not so sour that I wouldn't sit here and go, do you know what? Fair fucks to them. Like, yes, they came up against a Munster team who were, I just think, had just run out of steam. There was just no more in their tank. And like that, look, that happens at different points in the season for different teams. Yes, they came up against a Bulls team who were heinous in that final. But ultimately, they won a semi-final in Thomond Park and a final at altitude in South Africa. Like, that's good going. That's great. Like, they deserve, on the context of that knockout run, they deserve to be the URC champions. And look, I may not like it. I'm telling you one thing right now. I don't like it at all. I hate it, in fact. But, like, they do deserve it. They did play, like, 3 hard games and they won them. And, yeah, good for them, I guess. Like, Munster will just beat them in the knockout game next year. It doesn't even matter. But, like...
You see, I would agree. But this is kind of my alt account where I just say the shit that I don't get away with on my own page. So, no, I'm not going to be the bigger person about this.
No, that's fair. That's fair. And look, let it not go unsaid that fuck Glasgow forever. I hate those guys. And like the way that some of their players were acting on the sidelines in Thomond Park in the semi-final left a really bad taste in my mouth. And there's some things that are like more than just, you know, they won the rugby game. Like, obviously I'm a bit salty that they won the rugby game, but there are other things that, like, the result wouldn't matter to me if I saw Munster players acting like that. I'd be equally as disgusted. Like, there were some things just like lines were crossed, in my opinion. That's just me though. And like, but I'm not going to pretend that they didn't go on a hugely impressive knockout run, because they did. And like, in a way that almost makes it easier to deal with, because at least Munster didn't lose to like a wasted run, if that makes sense. Like, at least Glasgow actually went on the run, that they didn't, you know, just take down Munster and that was their final. Like, at least they actually then showed up in the final as well. And like, fair play to them, you know, they did what Leinster couldn't. And like, that's, you know, people thought that teams couldn't go to Loftus on a week's notice this season and win, and they did it. And then it went done now. Praising them.
The only team, well, only 2 teams have won 3 shields in a row in the URC era, but only one of them has actually gone on and won the URC. So like, I'm just saying, we do have awards to get into, because that's gonna, okay, this has been a fairly bright and optimistic podcast anyways, but that's beside the point. But to move up the moods again. But before we get there, to sum up the season, in a word, in a grade, in whatever metaphor, quote, whatever you want it to be, how would you sum up Munster's season?
We lost, but wait, no. I want to mess it.
Okay.
I think bittersweet maybe is a good way to put it, because obviously it didn't have the ending that we wanted, but there was so much along the way to take positives from, and like the experiences as well. Like I had great experiences at matches this season, and that's more of a personal thing than a Munster thing. But I think there were positives to take all season, and I think that I would be very hopeful about next season. Like I think that, you know, Munster are in a good place despite the sort of objectively horrific end to the season in losing to Glasgow. And if anybody who works for Munster is listening to this, just one small piece of advice, just like don't lose to Glasgow next season. Maybe that's just, you know, that's just one that I sort of thought of in the week that I thought maybe you guys could take into next season. So that's how I would feel about
We've
Munster
said
season.
too many things not to be on that side of the fence, anyways. And not just in the last 2 or 3 weeks or in the last season, in the last whatever amount of years of following this team. We've said too many things about
You
Glasgow
know,
too.
Alex Nankerveld clearly felt bad about getting that red card in the semi-final, which, whatever about the decision, I don't want to talk about the decision itself, but he obviously felt like, you know, guilty, or like he let the side down or whatever. Alex, my guy, you should have hit him harder. Like, and he will learn. It's his first season as a Munster player. You know, he's kind of new around here. Like, he will learn fairly quickly that his only failing in that moment was not absolutely cutting the guy. And he'll do that next year. I firmly believe it.
As a lot of people have said in years gone by, if you're going to get sent off for something, make sure you fucking hit him hard enough.
If you're going to hit a Glasgow player, you may as well fucking hit him hard. That's all I'm saying.
I'm trying to think. Didn't Tyler level someone in that Axel game that time in the most like random? Like I'm pretty sure he absolutely cleaned someone, and it was just like one of those weird moments.
Keith Earls obviously got a red card in that game.
Yeah,
quite early on, and like that, you know, that was hugely.
That was not a red card either. But anyways, that's the hill I'll die on. It's like if that happened to any other player in any other game, I'd be like, yeah, red card. But no, not a red card. And fuck Glasgow, and that's where we'll leave it for the Glasgow chat. But couple of awards, couple of predictions to get into. Signing of the year, it's between Alex Nankerveld, Sean O'Brien, Owen Clark, and
Ollie Jaeger.
And Ollie Jaeger. Am I forgetting someone?
No.
I hope not.
Kieran MacDonald.
Kieran MacDonald, as Eric Fitzgerald once said in this podcast, was actually three lads from Ballynanty in a trench coat. Because we've no proof they actually exist. I need to double check to make sure I'm not actually forgetting a signing. So Ollie Jaeger, Owen Clark, Alex Nankerveld, Sean O'Brien, and yeah, that's it. Who is your signing of the season? And full disclosure, yes, we are biased in this conversation if it goes a certain way.
I mean, it is Alex Nankerveld. Like, and look, is that because Alex Nankerveld is my friend? Yes. No, Alex Nankerveld is not. I wouldn't call myself Alex Nankerveld's friend. I'm not stupid, right? But we did interview Alex Nankerveld this season, and he was really lovely. And
I thought we were friends, but all right.
Let's be real. We're all in Alex Nankerveld's DMs. But I do think that, like, what a player, right? And he's one of those guys who I think it's so exciting to watch him hit the ground running so fast, and think like what he'll do with a full Munster preseason and like a full sort of run into next season. I think that and like, you know, doing it without Frisch is going to change things, I suppose, but like whoever settled in there with him, I think Alex Nankerveld's the guy.
I think what impressed me most about Alex Nankerveld, as much as we kind of make comparisons like Rua Topoki during the middle of the season, when Alex was just like, fuck this, I don't care that there's like 7 Scarlets forwards hanging out of me, I'm just going to keep running. And I love that about him.
Just got through so much work all the time.
So much. And like, I don't think any Munster signing in recent years has been as much of a level raiser as Alex Nankerveld has been this season. As in, when he's not on the field, we look a different team. Do you know?
Yeah.
Like, are we a different team with the last 5 months against Glasgow if he's on the field? Yes. Are we a different team against Leinster and the Aviva if he's on the field? Yes. The Edinburgh game, if he continues in the centre, yes, it's a different game, and so on and so
It
forth.
really feels like a missing piece that was found, and it's crazy because like he's a guy from New Zealand. Like he
And
wasn't.
I don't think we knew that. I
No.
genuinely don't think we knew he was the missing piece of the puzzle. Hello?
Yeah. Hello?
Oh, sorry. No, I think I cut out there for a second. But I don't think he was. I don't think he was a missing piece at all. I think he was just
Yeah.
unbelievable. We're going to miss Antoine Frisch. Antoine Frisch is going to get capped by another country, and that's disappointing, to say the least.
It's great for him, like
it's
but
great for him. It's disappointing for Munster. That's how these things happen. But look, we go again. It's going to be another centre pairing yet again, which is disappointing. But I think the fact that Alex has had such an impact in his first season, I think changes things. It's kind of like last year when Mala left, because Frisch was so good in his first year, it changed the perception of things. And I think this is the same idea. Again, we will get into young player of the year, all that in a minute. Favorite moment from the season, and this could be as obscure and as random as you want. It could be you telling Glasgow players to fuck off for all I know. I don't know, but what's your favorite moment of the season?
I mean, there definitely was a bit of that, to be honest. But like I say,
Internally or externally?
No comment. No, like obviously as a supporter, like there are different moments to the best moment for the team, right? So like for me, the trip to Treviso was unreal. Great trip, like so much fun. We still talk about it all the time. Also, like we talked about like little moments that you pick up throughout a season. Walking into Terminal 2 in Dublin Airport to fly to the Northampton round of 16 game, seeing that the team sheet had dropped and John Ryan was named despite the fact that he was literally suspended is something that will stick with me. I was like, oh my God, John Ryan, what the fuck are you doing here? I loved that. I think from a game point of view, like winning in Loftus, because I fucking said it for so long. I said it every week. I was like, Munster will win in Loftus.
You're gonna have your barrage moment of you all fucking doubted me here.
I knew
yes,
they'd do
you
it.
did.
I knew they'd do it. I think that game as well was such a huge, like, this is the team that Munster have been all along. Like,
yeah.
It was such a recognition of that. And the Toulon game was that too, but I think the Bulls game was that a bit more. And the fact that they backed it up then.
Yeah. I have a few insofar as, because Simon Zebo retired, I think a lot of Simon Zebo moments just get pushed up the list. The break against Leinster, the try against Toulon, the try against the Ospreys, and being there, and I can't speak for yourself, but being there as he walks down the tunnel after that Glasgow game, and there's not a huge pile left in the terrace. Well, I don't know about the terrace, but in the stand behind me.
Yeah.
And people are singing his name, and it's like, oh, like, yes, we swear a lot in this podcast. I understand that. But it is just that sense of, fuck, like, this is cruel. This sport doesn't do fairy tales. Like, it just doesn't.
Nope.
And it's, no one deserved it. Sorry, no one deserved a fairy tale send off more than Keith Earls did last year. And in the manner that he did it, with the 80 minutes against Leinster and that tackle against the Stormers. But no one deserved it more than Zeebs either, especially at home. Because I've said this before, no one will ever have the same impact as Simon Zebo had in Thomond Park. Because, and it's not just Thomond, it's across Ireland. Like, he was a mixed race Irish kid from Cork, cheeky smile, played up to the crowd. He loved them and they loved him.
Like
and
we said
so
at the
many
time,
of those moments are just like, you. I hate it. Like, you're not going to get that again. Other players will be loved. I think Craig Casey and Jack Crowley are on that path to being absolutely adored, but you just won't get that back again. And I
do. I personally adore Jack Crowley. On the record. But yeah, it's one of those, like we said it at the time when he announced the retirement, like you're losing a personality as much as you're losing a player, and you're losing like a sort of an aura, I suppose. And like, you're right, sport doesn't do fairy tales, because if they did, Munster would have fucking won a trophy in 2017, I tell you that much. Like, there was no greater fairy tale ending than that one.
Yeah.
And like, it was taken from them. And after that, I was like, well, whatever. Like, sport can go fuck itself.
And wait until you see what the rest of 2017 had in store for Munster rugby after that.
Wait until you see what's coming over the next sort of 5 years, guys. Come on now. Yeah, it's
in
like
terms
there
of
were
yeah,
moments like all over the
Loftus
season.
was class. I think beating Toulon was pretty cool because Munster hadn't had a big away result like that in a while.
I think the Toulon one for me maybe doesn't get the credit in my own head that it should because they lost to Northampton the next week. So it felt like it was like it felt like a spike, whereas the Bulls game was like a steady rise and they kept winning and like they played so well and they kept playing well after that. And that felt huge. I loved, I love being at games and I love traveling to go to games, but being at home for the Bulls game, like sitting on the floor, because that's where I go, where I get nervous, I go downwards. You know, I was on my hunches for a lot of the semi-final. You know,
yeah.
I tend to just move towards the ground for like safe level where when things get stressful. And like when I'm watching something at home, if I'm getting like stressed, I'll sit on the floor. That's just what I've always done that. And so I was firmly on the floor watching probably all of that Bulls game. Actually, I was just sitting on the floor the whole time. And then they won, and I was like, I can get off now safely. I can return to, head height. Like it was brilliant. That was a great
if we have to
moment in the
pick
season.
one moment, so is it that Bulls game?
Yeah, I think so.
I if I was to throw out an honorable mention, it is Tom Ahern and those runs, and against Exeter and against Glasgow and against fucking Toulon and those long distance tries, just because they're so fucking cool. Like there's something. It's like, do you know when you watch a really well? I know for yourself because you'd agree with me on this. When you watch a really good scrum, there's this like weird part of your brain, and that switch clicks. For me, watching second rows break loose, and Jorge Snyman had a few breaks this year and things like that. It's like, yes, this is why I love this sport, because every other sport they'd say, "What's entertaining about this?" I'm like, yes, this is my guy. And
honorable mention for moment of the season, and like stick with me here. When the news broke that RG Snyman was signing for Leinster, because nothing will ever beat that for just pure fucking comedy. Because the absolute most crackpot thing that anyone could have said was South Africa are calling up John Klein so that Munster have 2 non-Irish qualified locks, and when South Africa's head coach then goes to Leinster after the World Cup, he can nab RG Snyman. And everyone was like, shut up, that's crazy talk. And then literally like 12 minutes later, it was like, Jerry Thornley's like, guys, I've had 6 bottles of red wine and pressing send on this article right now. RG Snyman
doing
is
it at
signing for
11 o'clock at
Leinster.
night. He
Did
knew.
it so like, yeah. Well, he was fucking scuttered, I'd say, but he knew well, like, and it like obviously at the time not funny, but the
But at the
context
same time,
from a Leinster point of view, like the context of what's come after with Leinstermas and losing another final, and the just sort of like dropping that dud on the week of the Stephen's Day game in Thomond Park, and then it coming out afterwards that like people in Munster didn't know, whatever, like blah blah blah, like the whole thing just took on a new comedy element, and it was already pretty, like things can be comedic but not be funny, like, and I wasn't laughing that RG Snyman was going to Leinster, right, but it was pretty funny. And it was just it's a nice moment where everyone agrees on something and there's a real community element of fuck this.
Well, I wouldn't. I don't know. As someone who lives online in the rugby ether, I don't think everyone agreed with me, to be honest. On my takes on that one, but yes,
everyone who I cared to read their opinion agreed, and it was just funny. Like I think that the best moment of Munster season was probably winning in Loftus first felt, but there's something to be said for the funniest moments as well.
Honorable mention, because we have to mention it, is Sean Klein and Jorge Snyman winning the World Cup, because that was the most nervous I was, like, this entire season. Like, okay, Ireland, New Zealand, that's different, but like after Ireland's World Cup entry ended, the whole way through, that was the most nervous I was. I really fucking wanted them to get it done. And yes, the August Neyman thing and how it unfolded was shit, and Sean Klein has been injured half the season.
I don't think it takes away from that at all, though. That's how I felt.
Unbelievable.
Like,
and the support that they got is kind of ties into what we talked about earlier about Munster and all this. Like, it's
like I was there, and it was the first weekend of the whole World Cup where it was cold. It had been warm the whole time. It was really cold that weekend. So I had my big Munster coat on. It's my warm weather coat because I'm used to fucking going to games in January in Thomond Park. And so it's, you know, the big red puffy coat with the Munster crest and the big hood. So I had that on, like, and I must have seen, you know, 20 other guys in Munster jerseys in the crowd that day in the final. And I was up at the very top. So like even just in the couple of blocks that I saw, so many Munster jerseys. The next morning, like 6 hours after the end of the final, when I flew to Venice for the Treviso game, there was like 5 guys on the same flight as me wearing Munster jerseys, doing the same stupid thing I was doing. Like, we were so behind them. And I feel like the sort of the vindication of watching Jean Klein come on in a World Cup final and play such a huge part in like South Africa actually getting over the line. I didn't feel like I was supporting either team until I got there. And then I was like, oh no, the thing is, I'm not like, do I care if South Africa win the World Cup? Not really, but I care very, very much that Jean Klein wins this World Cup right now. Like, he could have been playing for Romania and I would have been like, let's go Romania, that kind of thing. Like, it wasn't necessarily that I was supporting South Africa, but watching Jean
after
Klein,
all the talk, like,
yeah,
there
like
was
watching
talk that
Jean
Ireland
Klein
weren't
win
missing
that
out
World
that this
Cup.
lad wasn't international quality. Like,
And
again,
that talk was always bullshit, right? But like,
from lads who are
watching him
5'10" and had fucking blonde tips in their hair, like,
watching him literally win a fucking World Cup after everything that was thrown at him was huge.
Yeah.
And like the being in Thomond Park then when he came back afterwards, and I was like, this is just unreal. The guy's a World Cup winner, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, absolutely. I have young player of the year written down. But the only thing is, right, what quantifies as young player of the year? Because
If you
like,
take the URC, it's Jack Crowley.
I mean, yeah, but again, I think he's
That seems
too
crazy
old
to
for
me.
that. Like, I think, oh my god, who, like,
Is it Alex Candela?
genuinely, could we do that as the cutoff? Like, anyone younger than me, and I'm 23. So is that like the cutoff?
I mean,
Because
I
I feel
guess.
like Tom Ahern is like 24 going on 25. I think that's too old.
I don't think he's a young player. I would
No.
probably say Alex Candela. I think it would definitely be Edwin Adogbo had he not gotten injured. Like, if he, like, because the trajectory his season was going on, if it keeps going, he's like fucking, you know, world beater all time level season. With how well
Brian
he was
Gleeson?
playing. Again, I'm just not sure we saw enough of him.
Yeah,
In the
that's my
end,
thing as
like,
well.
I think that Brian Gleeson is one of those players where you're looking at, like, do you remember Alex Candela in that first season where he played the quarterfinal against Toulouse and was playing all those games, and you were sort of looking at it and you were like, next season this guy's going to be unreal. I feel like that's how I feel about Brian Gleeson at the moment, where it's like,
But with less games.
In September, when you look at like him and Gavin Coombs sort of basically rotating in that 8 jersey all season, that's what I'm really excited about from a Brian Gleeson point of view this season. I think what we saw of him, obviously unbelievable. Like, he's a unit, like, he's huge. But I think, yeah, he's my young player I'm most excited to watch next season, which is one that's coming up. But I think it's probably Alex Candela.
Probably has to be. Like, there's not a huge because again, you have to balance the fact
Although there's no player younger in Munster squad than Summer Archer. You know, he's only 2 years of age.
Fuck it, we'll go with Summer Archer. I can't argue with that.
And how wonderful he is.
Fuck it, why not? Because we have to get him in there somewhere. Like, these are the laws of this podcast. If we're going to go player of the year, I feel like we can narrow it down between Nank, Jack Crowley, Thomas Ahern, Gavin Coombs. Is that fair?
I have 2, and I'm looking
Calvin
at
Nash.
them.
I think I'd add Calvin Nash to that, to be honest.
I'm looking at them in different ways. Where I feel that Munster's player of the year was Tyke Byrne, in that he was just always there. He's Tyke Byrne. Like, there's almost like full stop, right? Like, his form never dipped below what it needed to be for Munster, and he's like that consistent, like, sort of showing up. You look at that Northampton round of 16 game, like, Tyke Byrne was there, you know,
The Glasgow
whether
game.
he was, yeah, like, it's what he is that guy. I think that Munster's MVP this season, because obviously, look, Tyke Byrne was playing for Ireland, so there were stretches of the season where he wasn't there. I think Munster's MVP this season is Gavin Coombs. I think he took on what Jean Klein took on last season in terms of just fucking being there every single week. Like, just when everyone was injured around him, he was there. And that's not to say that, like, getting injured counts against other players. That's not what I mean. It's not like a fucking mental weakness issue. The players got injured. But like Gavin Coombs was that guy who was consistently there. He was just, at times it just felt like he was just pure shoveling shit and doing it from the second row as well for huge parts of the season. Like
over 200 tackles, over 200 carries.
You just can't fault the guy.
He's kind of at that CJ Stander level where it's like, now granted, CJ Sanders playing a very different Munster team, but Gavin Coombs this year had to do everything. And people are like, oh, but is he explosive enough? Because he was explosive before this. It's like, yeah. But the big difference is this time he's not carrying against some fucking measly centre. He's carrying against other second rows. You're not going to be as explosive, but you can be as effective. And he was effective.
If you want to use explosive as like a Gavin Coombs buzzword, right? Maybe he's not as explosive as he was, but he is an exponentially better rugby player now than he was 2 years ago. He is a so much more well-rounded, better rugby player now. And if people want to not see that because they've decided that the only thing that he should do is explosive carries, that's the things that like people put him in this box, and then he expanded his game so much, and people were like, but you're now doing other things that are not. Yeah, exactly. And I just think that like that's what it all comes down to. And look, like I don't care what color jersey he plays in as long as he's playing in red, right? Like I don't care that he's not getting called up. I don't really think he cares that much either, to be honest.
Gavin Coombs to Wales, here we go.
Gavin Coombs to the Scarlets. You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. No, but you know, like just a hugely crucial player from a Munster point of view, and one that like you just feel so lucky is on your team. And if other people don't get that, then that just feels like they're lost. Like, because, you know, I'm not one of those people who's like the stats tell the whole story, but they also don't lie either. And I think if you look at his stats, like that tells you how good a season he's had before you even look at 1 minute of him playing. And then you look at him, especially in those games where he came off the bench and he had the freedom of having a big pack around him and not having to plug into the second row. He's like, I feel like we're having all the same conversations that we've been having about Jean Clain for the last number of seasons, where it's like, what, like, why are we pretending that this guy is not one of the best players in the league? Because he is. And I think that he was Munster's most important player this season by a long. Like he was. Can I
throw out an honourable mention as well that I forgot in the first list? Jeremy Luckman.
Oh yeah, for sure. Season of his life.
Like, we won't get into Ireland chat because we don't chat about Ireland.
But can I get into Ireland chat for one quick second? Because
go on.
I just don't understand. If anybody wants, and I'm actually very serious about this, if anybody wants to explain to me in a way that makes sense why Jeremy Loughman is not in this Ireland squad, I would genuinely love to hear it, because I do not understand. Because Ireland don't have any loose head prop that is not Andrew Porter. Love and respect to Cian Healy, but he's literally drawing his pension for the first time this week, and now he's going on this tour of South Africa. Jeremy Loughman, and I understand, while I may not like it, I understand that Ireland will only pick from the same like pool of 37 players, right? And that's a stretch. It's probably like 34. And I get
that. 35-man squad, but yes, it is kind of 34 to be fair.
That's fine. He likes those 38 players. That's absolutely grand. Everybody's got their preferences, right? Jeremy Loughman has been one of those 38 players for like 2 seasons now.
He was at the World Cup.
So why the fuck do you not bring him now when he's just had the best season of rugby he's ever played, and you've only got one fucking loose head that's not Andrew Porter? Like, yeah. I just don't get it. But yeah, no, I agree with you. Jeremy Loughman's had an unreal season. Again, one of those guys who's had to play so many more minutes than he really should have. Until they discovered that John Ryan is a loose head now, which I really hope continues in September. I'd love to see him actually play the full season there, to be honest. But yeah, like I agree with that. But I think Gavin Coombs for me is the guy who I can't see past.
I think one of the things that we kind of used against this team at one point of the season was it was the same 5 or 6 players turning up week in, week out, and others weren't at their level. Jack Crowley, Calvin Nash, Gavin Coombs, Tom Ahern, and I would say Tadhg Beirne, but Tadhg Beirne was a little bit different insofar as he was obviously late back and whatever. But they were kind of the players that we kept using as those examples.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where you're going to pick your crop from. Like, I think in terms of who went up a level the most, it's probably between Jeremy Loughman and Calvin Nash. As remarkable as that is to say about Calvin Nash, but I think he's a much better player than he was last year. In terms of who was most consistent week in, week out, it's probably Gavin Coombs. But then the big playability, like Tadhg Beirne, like if Munster get over the line, that semi-final, or against Northampton in the round of 16, Tyke Burns' performance gets analysed by fucking people in 100 years' time. Like, I think that was one of his best ever performances in Thomond Park. Arguably his best ever performance in Thomond Park 2 weeks ago against Glasgow. Yes, it's disappointing they didn't win. I'll go with Gavin Coombs, because hashtag Munster fans, hashtag outraged, etc. etc. That he's not on the Ireland squad. But there's literally nothing else that this man can do.
Let me make one thing very clear. I could not be less outraged that there are not more Munster players in that Ireland squad. I think the best place for Munster players to be right now is nowhere near that Ireland squad. I don't think the tour should be happening. I feel like that's regardless of who they picked.
Why go to South Africa after the longest year, and then the Lions years are always long years as well?
I just don't think that there should have been summer tours this year. Full stop, across the board. That's how I feel. But also, the tour is going to be a fucking disaster. And like, Ireland might win a game, they might win 2 games. Doesn't make it less of a disaster, in my opinion. It shouldn't be happening. And the only place I want Munster players to be right now is on holiday before they go back and have a nice pre-season with Munster and then start playing for Munster. So, hashtag this Munster fan could not be less hashtag outraged about the Ireland tour. I literally don't care about the Ireland tour. Anyway, next award. Said Ireland 2 times now.
No, we're finished with awards. Next season, 4 or 5 predictions, give or take, for next year. Signing that you're most excited to watch.
I mean, it probably is Taki or Abrahams. Like, that's kind of like objectively, you look at a highlight reel of this guy and you're like, whoa, that's one that like Munster haven't had a player like him in a while, I don't think. And that's exciting. I'm actually really looking forward to, but like maybe in combination with him though, I'm really looking forward to Diarmuid Kilgallen. I'm not going to claim to be an expert on Diarmuid Kilgallen, right? Because Connacht are one of those teams that I won't really watch unless they're playing Munster because they don't inspire me.
Again, you famously said if it's Munster against Connacht in a URC quarterfinal, fuck it, we're not talking about it because it's only Connacht. So like, listen, fair enough.
Look, that's just how I feel. Connacht in general is not an inspiring place to me, but gauging the signing of Diarmuid Kilgallen based on how Connacht supporters reacted to it, I'm looking forward to it. Because I think you can tell a lot when you sign a player based on how that team's supporters react to losing the player, if that makes sense. Like when Munster signed Antoine Frisch, I don't think a lot of us really knew who Antoine Frisch was, but Bristol supporters were like, oh, fuck this. Now we don't have Antoine Frisch anymore. And that says a lot. And Connacht supporters were a little bit salty about losing Diarmuid Kilgallen. So I think that him in combination with Abrahams and like, one of Nash or Daly or whoever it ends up being, right? Whatever, like that, the back 3 for Munster next season is really exciting to me. I think it probably is Abrahams though, like,
and we get one week of Casey, Crowley, Nankerville. I'll go with Sean O'Brien as their 13 just for now. Kilgallen, Nash, Abrahams.
Oh, I'd love to see it, and
it's not going to happen because
realistically 6 of those players are going to be injured at all times this season. So fucking get used to that. But no, like that's hugely, like that's what you want for, like you said earlier, your big European win in Thomond Park. Like Munster didn't have that this season. They had, the academy plus Joey Carberry on one hand, and like that's the kind of thing that Munster were dealing with this season. But that's hugely exciting in terms of next season. Like I think Taki Abrahams is one of those guys who it's impossible to not be excited when you see a clip of this guy playing rugby and go, wait, he's going to be doing that with a Mike Prendergast attack and Mossy Lawler skills. Like that's hugely exciting.
You touched on young player you're most excited to watch in Brian Gleeson earlier. I would agree with Brian Gleeson, and I really look forward to seeing what he does at the main rugby this month, which is of course the Under-20 World Cup, the only thing that matters really. But if we can get minutes into, Edwin Odog was probably going to be out for a while, but if we can get any minutes at all into like fucking Sean Odogbo, Max Line, Evan O'Connell, I would love to see it. Now they're all very, very young. They're all very unlikely to feature. But like, I just want to see the 2 Odogbos on the field for Munster against like some very light pack and watching Sean just basically run over lads like he did in Musgrave Park.
I think that's a the following season dream for me.
Yeah, it is. I think I'm Brian Gleeson is the right answer, but just Brian Gleeson,
Ruan Quinn. I feel like Evan O'Connell will get cycled in a little bit more this season as well. Like I think that they'll try and
has a chance if he continues.
A small chance. Yeah, because it's not about the sort of the skill level of those young players either. Like they're hugely talented young players, but it is about like protecting them until they're ready. I think it's so detrimental to a young player season to put them in before they're ready. Like I'm not going to get into my personal opinions on Sam Prendergast, but I think he is in danger of suffering from that. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. And I think that protecting your academy players and your young players until they're ready, like recognizing when they're ready. Like Edwin Adogbo and Brian Gleeson were ready this season, but someone like Ruan Quinn was less ready, so he played less. And that's no slight on any of those players. It's just about like it's a man management game as much as it is, a player management thing. So like recognizing when guys are ready. Yeah, 100%. And I think that not dropping guys in for the sake of it before they're ready is hugely important. And I think Munster in general are very good at that.
And finally then, your predictions for next season, URC and Europe. I'm going to say Europe, because we don't have the pools yet, it's very hard to be like too hard and fast on it. Like we could end up getting the pool with fucking Toulouse, fucking Storm. No, actually, South African team is actually what you want in your pool. What you don't want is like the Ospreys.
We can't get a URC team. Well, yeah, in our pool, but like we won't be playing them.
You won't be playing them, but what you don't want is a team who'll automatically lose 4 games. That's my mindset on it. So you don't want like
sense.
Ospreys, and you don't want who came 7th in the league. Benetton. You don't really want those two. So if we could get if we do get like Ospreys, fucking Toulouse, Northampton, fucking Bordeaux, and like Leicester.
No, I think what you have to realize
ultimately bad, but
is Munster, so it will be Ba. It will probably be Northampton. To be honest, it'll probably also be Toulouse, and it'll be like La Rochelle or Cast. Like it's always the teams that Munster. Yeah. Like that's it. That's exactly it.
It's going to be Cast away as well. We're going to have Cast and Toulouse away just so we don't get a trip over to Bath.
Munster are going to win the Heineken Cup this season, full stop.
Because it's Cardiff.
The finals in Cardiff. Where the fuck else would Munster win a Heineken Cup? Like Munster have been waiting for the finals being Cardiff for many years now. And they are going to win it. They're going to win the URC as well. Like the prediction thing is kind of stupid because like obviously Munster are going to do the double, so it's kind of pointless. I feel like it's been a long time since a team has done. Well, yeah, it's been a while since the team has done the double from our point of view. Like I know Toulouse will probably do it this year. But it's one of those where like you look at Leinster probably did it in 2018. But the league was much different then. I think winning the URC and the Heineken Cup would be a huge achievement. And Munster are the teams that are going to do that. So
I think URC final is the aim. After that,
if I'm being serious, I think the bare minimum is the final of the URC now. I think you want I think
quarterfinal Europe because you don't know what way it's going to go because
Europe's such a hard one to like quantify like a bare minimum of because you can say like bare minimum semi-final, but then like you end up the quarterfinal being away against Toulouse or whatever, and then you're just kind of fucked. But like I think an improvement in Europe, which would be obviously winning the round of 16 because that's where it's fallen the last couple of seasons. And I think from a URC point of view, I would like to see Munster be comfortably in top 4 for like the majority of the season. I know the way the URC works, like you could be in 6th but be level with a team in 4th, right? Like I'm not saying that Munster have to be in the top 4 for the entire season and never drop out of it, but not be in 11th on New Year's Day. Like that, not have that kind of season, be like that more like consistently like challenging for that top table. I think is what you'd like to see. And yeah, like URC final feels like the minimum, which is a high minimum, but like that's they've played themselves into that expectation. So
yeah, it's a very high bar, but also at the same time they can do it. And fuck it.
Yeah.
We're not going to be a fan podcast who comes on here and is like everything's shit, everything's awful just because we lost one game.
But it isn't though. If everything was shit and awful, I would say it. But like it isn't. I don't feel like it is. They lost a game, and that was shit and awful on that day. But it doesn't make the whole rest of the season and the whole rest of like what Munster can do and the whole rest of next season shit and awful just because they lost that game. Not in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Patricia, thanks very much for joining me. Not just today, but this season, 24 episodes. I know neither of us have 24 appearances this season, but that's just the way it is. Alex Nyfeld has won, and that's all that really matters in terms of who got game time. It's been a lot of fun. It's been so up and down. Like, it's like fuck me. After that Bayonne game, after that extra game. I know we didn't really record because we were thick.
We sort of
But
timed the weeks we took off really well with when Munster lost games.
yeah. And then there was like, oh, we've Zebra. We'll wait another 2 weeks. But it's been a lot of fun, and hopefully next season it'll grow a little bit more. I've heard rumors from the listenership that they are hoping for a single just Patricia podcast, just rambling on and bemoaning about other teams. Granted, this is from, let's just say, fan bases that aren't from the East, let's just say, who might be more in favour of that. We'll see. We'll look into it.
West Cork.
It's going to be the absolute unhinged, explicit version that we're going to see next season. But look,
send me discussion topics and I'll do a little like 10 minutes every week where Kaelan doesn't get to hear me and doesn't get to listen to it before he puts it out there, and then I just like defame everyone. I'm happy to do that.
I've no problem with that, apart from the fact there's my email on the account. That's the only issue that I have. But apart from that, I've no problem. Like, fuck it. It's been fun taking the piss out of every team under the sun. Like, even I think we jabbed at Montalban once at this stage. Like, it's been one of those. That's what it's all about. Hopefully we'll have more people listening next season. Maybe even a few interviews again. Alex, if you're listening, come on down, my guy.
Alex, if you're listening, please give me John Ryan's information.
It's just we need a prop cast where it's just going to be like fucking John Ryan, Stephen Archer, Ollie Yeager, and just talk about scrums, and then talk about mustaches, and then talk about playing in the heat. And then...
Don't threaten me with a good time.
We'll see. That's all for next season. God only knows when next season starts. I don't know. It's September. We'll be back when we're back. But for now, and until further ado, thanks very much to everyone, and take it easy.